having a life scholarship and being able to afford to go to college made me feel inspired to go.
When I got a life scholarship, it was such a relief.
I knew that I wanted to have an impact. Having a life scholarship through the SC Education Lottery was huge. It gave me the opportunity to make that impact right here at home.
The South Carolina Education Lottery. A better you, a better us, a better South Carolina. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. This show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com and get a copy of my book. You get a signed copy of the book if you go there, as a matter of fact. How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. If you want the book quicker, you can get it on Amazon.com. Also, too, we have all kinds of services on there. If you think your husband's cheating on you, you send me his email address. We trace it back to online dating websites. We catch him cheating online. Also, check out OppermanReport.com. That's our radio show website. Now, on there, we have a special documents section. All these interviews I do with people and stuff like that, we look for court docs, or whatever, police reports, whatever we can find, we put them up there. Just recently we had Montgomery Blair Sibley, who's the attorney in the D.C. Madam case, and we have all the Verizon phone bills from the D.C. Madam, so you can go there, and there are a lot of interesting numbers in there. You can check them out one by one if you want. We have all the court docs from the latest Donald Trump rape lawsuit, guys, from Jane Doe, and I just added the affidavits from Jane Doe, who's the complainant in this lawsuit, and Tiffany Doe, who in her affidavit states that she worked for Jeffrey Epstein in the position of a party planner before Ghislaine Maxwell came in and took that position. Okay? Keep your eye on that lawsuit, guys. Trust me. Today we got Dean Arnold, and he's the author of Hillary and Vince, a story of love, death, and cover-up. And, of course, that's a story about the death of Vince Foster. You can get a hold of Dean Arnold at his website, which is bluebridge.com. That's spelled BLOOBRIDGE.com, bluebridge.com. Vince is gone. Dean, are you there?
Hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. I'm ready for your first very difficult question.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we're going to ask you. So Vince, tell us about yourself. Who is Dean Arnold?
Who is Dean Arnold? Dean Arnold is a investigative reporter, a writer, a documentarian, and I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I've been here most of my life, having attended Christian Liberal Arts College here that's on top of Lookout Mountain overlooking the city. And I came back here after being away for a couple years doing some crazy things, and I was a pro-life activist. I was a pro-family activist. I was the head of the Christian Coalition here in the area. I've since then moved libertarian. We can talk about that another day. But I did a lot of activism and that kind of thing in my day. I had my own news publication called the Chattanooga Fax that went to 10,000 fax machines a week. This was before the internet, so I was the only alternative print media in our area back in that day. And I'll just go ahead and tell the story. I was doing that, and really just before that, I was working at a kind of a think tank here in town, and the Vince Foster story broke, and so I started following it. In fact, probably got some of my early information from Mike Rivero. I listened to his podcast with you. It was a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Well, he's one of my heroes, and I listened to that podcast twice to make sure I got all my ducks in a row for compare and contrast. But so I saw the famous picture on the TV of the hand holding the gun, and for people who don't know what we're talking about, because I actually had some friends I had lunch with today who didn't know the story, and they're my age. Well, I'm 52. So when the Clintons first came to office in 1993, about 5 months in, it was national headlines that one of their closest friends from Arkansas and Deputy White House Counsel Vince Foster was found dead by gunshot at a park in Washington, right near the White House. And so that was kind of big news and trumpeted everywhere. And very quickly, the press started coming out and saying it was suicide. But also at the same time, lots of strange questions started to emerge that made you wonder why it was suicide and made you wonder why they so quickly ruled it a suicide. So pretty much back in the day, most everybody was familiar with the whole Vincent Foster thing. What really got me particularly interested in it personally was I was watching the Senate Banking Committee hearings, which I think were about a year after Foster was found dead. They spent a day doing some interviews and that sort of thing, and most of it was kind of political, sideshow as you'd expect. But there was a couple of senators that really took it seriously and did some pretty good work. Louch Faircloth from North Carolina was the key one. And there's about a half a minute to a minute long exchange that he had with the coroner. Well, the coroner, Dr. James Beyer, was the only person who saw Vince Foster's supposed 1.25 inch head wound in his skull. All the 26 other people at Fort Marcy Park who saw him said there was no wound in the head. But suddenly Beyer finds this 1.25 inch hole in his head. And so everybody's wondering where that came from. We can talk about why that matters in a minute. But Louch Faircloth interviews the coroner, this kind of old, shifty-looking guy, and he says, "You said in your report that you X-rayed Foster, but now you say you didn't. Did you or didn't you?" And Beyer says, "Well, I didn't take X-rays." He said, "Why did you say you did if you didn't?" He says, "Well, I filled out the report beforehand and put an X by X-rays, but then it turned out our X-ray machine wasn't working. And so we didn't take any X-rays." And Faircloth says, "Well, the park police say that you told them that you took X-rays and you told them the results of the X-rays. Why would the park police say that?" And he says, "I don't remember that." He says, "Well, they do." And he says, "Well, I don't have an explanation because I didn't take any X-rays." It's one of the most indicting exchanges I'd ever seen. And it was just
you know what? It would be so easy to follow up on that. It's okay, then tomorrow when we reconvene these hearings, produce the receipt or the work order of the repair of the X-ray machine. And then have those dates on it. You know?
They obviously there was pressure or, whatever. And, Faircloth probably didn't have a majority to pull that off on the committee. But actually, Reed Irvin with Accuracy and Media, who was one of the key guys kind of bird dogging this whole thing, he actually did follow up on that and talked to a guy named, I think his name was Poore, last name Poore. And he was the one who repaired those X-ray machines. Because Beyer testified that he, Faircloth says in the hearing, he says, "You mean to tell me you ran a coroner's office for 5 weeks without an X-ray machine?" And because that's what he said. He said it was a 5-week period. But when Reed Irving called this poor guy, who was the guy who maintains his X-rays machines, he said he didn't get a call for 3 months after Foster's death. And it was probably a CYA thing. We better call the X-ray machine repairman because we told the Senate that we, or after the hearings that he did that. That's a good question, Ed. The Senate Banking Committee didn't do it. Reed Irvine did check on it. There was a discrepancy. Anywhere you look, that guy was lying on several different fronts. So that was an interesting exchange that really got my blood boiling. And I took somehow I videotaped it. And I took that exchange to the editor-publisher of our local newspaper, who was we have one of the few very conservative papers in Chattanooga. Back in the day we did. And this guy was also an outspoken Christian, very much a right-wing Republican and, a hater of the Clintons and all that kind of stuff. So I take this thing to him and show him, and I'm like, this guy's going to go nuts on this and just, sound the trumpet and go for it. And he just looked at it and nodded his head and smiled and said, "Thank you," and that was it. Not a conspiracy, but just another dude who doesn't want to make waves. I don't know. So that was the beginning of it for me. And so that caused me to take quite a bit of interest in this story. And then it kind of stayed there. But then in about 2007, I found myself living in the kind of Philadelphia area, and also spent a lot of time in the Baltimore, Washington, Annapolis area. And I found a friend who we got talking about this or something, and he told me about this friend he had, Turley, Hugh Turley, who was also, his professional name was Turley the Magician because he did magic acts. And he said he was one of the close friends of Patrick Knowlton, who was one of the key witnesses at the very beginning of the Vince Foster murder scene, and ended up being a plaintiff in a lawsuit against the Supreme Court, or that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And he ended up having his appendix refuting the entire Ken Starr investigation added as an appendix to the Starr reports. And it's an incredible case. Anyway, I followed Pat Knowlton's case for several years, thought he was a real hero. Anyway, when I ran into an acquaintance who was friends with his close friend, I was like, hey, I'd like to track that down. So I did. I was in a mode of looking for my next gig as a writer and an investigative reporter. And I met him, and I ended up meeting Patrick Knowlton, and I spent a few days with those guys, learning everything I could, interviewing them and that sort of thing. Raised a little bit of money to work on this project. And so the plan was I was going to do a documentary about Hillary in 2008. Is that when it was? Was that the election year?
Yeah, it was the last one, yeah.
And so I'd raised a little bit of seed money to write the treatment for the documentary. I was, interviewing all these people. I was doing all this research. This is around early fall or something of 2007. And so as soon as I wrote the treatment, which became what is now the book, and it's got like 300 footnotes, it's well documented, everything. It's a pretty serious deal. I just decided to write it that way when I wrote the documentary treatment. So then when I was done with it, I was like, okay, I'm going to go out there and raise a bunch of money. And but right as that happened, I mean, a week or two before I was set to raise the money for this documentary, Hillary plummeted in the polls, and this guy named Barack Obama appeared out of nowhere and all of a sudden was like the shoe-in to become the Democratic nominee. It was the strangest thing in the world. Well, I couldn't raise the money for this project because Hillary was no longer in play, and it was just piling on. So I put the project to rest. I just put it to bed, and I said, well, that's the way it is, God's will, whatever. And I went on with my life. Back then, we didn't have Amazon wasn't such a presence, and we didn't have print on demand and that sort of thing. And so I didn't really think about making it a book. But this second time around, 8 years later, I pulled out the manuscript, started reading it, and I was like, man, this is a really good book. I'm part investigative reporter, but I'm really a storyteller. I mean, I write screenplays, and I've written a book on story structure. And so if I've got an expertise in anything, it's probably applying story structure to nonfiction. I'm really good at that. And so I've written a book that's really a great read. And so I picked up the manuscript. I'd forgotten about it. And I started reading. I was like, man, this is good. Man, this is good. This is really good. And then it had 300 footnotes. So it was all documented. I could source everything. I was like, I think I probably ought to go ahead and release this to the public. So that's what I did.
And the book is available now on Amazon?
Yeah, just search Hillary and Vince, and just remember that Hillary has 2 L's. Right, do Hillary and Vince, it'll be the first thing that comes up.
Now, like you said, we did the show with Rivero, and I just recently had Kathleen Woolley on the show too.
Listen to that.
Yeah, well, you did. Okay, good. Now, she didn't seem to think that Foster and Hillary were having an affair. How did you come up with this information that they were lovers?
5 different sources on that, and there's probably more, but I stopped at 5.
Okay.
The first one is I've got this here, page 17 and 18. So the first source on that is Dr. Michael Galster, whose wife Valley was a close friend of Hillary. And they moved in their social circles and everything. He said, quote, it was an accepted fact that Hillary and Vince were sleeping with each other. Hillary and Vince's love affair was an open secret. So that's source number 1, Dr. Michael Galster. Source number 2 was the 2 state troopers in Troopergate that I think was it Brock who reported in the American Spectator, but they, most of the focus back in the day when they were when the troopers were revealing all this stuff was all the smut that Bill was doing, but they also had some stuff on Hillary, and they talked about Hillary and Vince, and they said that whenever Bill would go out of town, Vince would show up like clockwork at the governor's mansion in the evening, and they also escorted Hillary and Vince to a remote cabin in the woods. Oh, really? So that's two. So that's three sources. The fourth source is L.D. Brown, who was Bill Clinton's closest bodyguard. He says, quote, "I saw them locked in each other's arms, deep kissing, nuzzling." And another time he says, "I saw them running tongues down each other's throats." He says, Hillary and Vince were deeply in love. He says, "I was there. I saw it." So that's source number 4. And then there's a fifth source that I'll find if I keep looking. But anyway, where'd that fifth source go?
Well, that's okay, too. We got 5 sources who said they were having an affair. Now, to jump around a little bit, just recently Donald Trump brought up Vince Foster. And again, as usual, it was just dismissed by the media, like, this has all been proven, this has all been investigated.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Okay.
Jim McDougal of Whitewater fame.
Okay.
Quote, "Everybody knew about Hillary and Vince." He talked about their affair as well. So that's the fifth source. Go ahead.
Okay, now Trump came out and brought up Vince Foster again, right? And the whole media said, poo-poo, it's all been investigated, it's all over with. It's a conspiracy theory. It's a wild, it's just amazing. But it's just amazing how they get away with this. But Vince Foster's wife came out and said, I don't believe that there was a murder. So what do you make of that? Have you had a chance to talk to her?
I have not. I have talked to a couple of people related to it here recently, or at least one. I'll tell you about it later. But I have not tried to contact the Foster family. As you know, Ed, most people just don't want to be touching anything that's dangerous, anything that has to do with controversy. Even when you talk to Kathleen Willey, as much as she knows and as much as she's experienced, for her to say she figures Vince Foster was suicided or committed suicide, she actually flip-flopped back and forth through the entire interview. She went from being conspiratorial to not being conspiratorial to being back to conspiratorial on all sorts of issues, I think including her own husband. But I think human nature is to just shy away from it and just not want to make a big deal about it. And I think that's where probably the Fosters were, now some of the Foster family, like the grandson of Vince Foster, who was 16 years old and went hunting with his father and was a firearms expert. He testified very vociferously that the gun that they showed was not his grandfather's gun, and a silver antique revolver. There's parts of the Foster family that have been a little more vocal. But yeah, Lisa Foster, she said that, that's easy thing. That's an easy thing for the media to do. Go find somebody like that who just doesn't want to cause any trouble. I mean, how many times we've seen that? Monica Lewinsky was saying that for a couple of years, signed an affidavit, said Bill had never done anything, and then all the truth comes out. So that's par for the course.
Now remind me again, with the gun, did they ever trace the serial number on that gun and find that gun was not registered to Foster, correct?
The gun didn't have a serial number. It was too old.
Okay, right. Okay.
It was two different pieces, separate pieces connected together, and it was too old. It was pre-1913 and no serial number. And the gun thing. Let me just tell you a little bit about the gun, and then just talk about the FBI corruption in general. But the gun. Okay, first they get there. There's reports from the first 911 caller who saw the body that he didn't have a gun. Okay? And then the first person on the scene arrives, and Foster's got, and he is the guy who, the first guy on the scene is a guy named Kevin Fornshill, and he was with the Park Police, but his job was to guard the entrance to the CIA, right, which was about which is a stone's throw from Fort Marcy Park. So he's the first guy, wouldn't you know it, to show up, and he's with the body by himself for a couple of minutes before a couple medics show up. And when the couple medics show up, there is a automatic 9mm gun, black gun in his hand. That's what the medics reported. A couple of people reported that. A guy named Richard Arthur was very adamant that that's what the gun was. Well, so another guy shows up named Edwards.
Before we get to that, this guy Forsey, the CIA door guard.
Yes,
Fornshield, sorry. Okay, I was just looking for his name to write it down correctly. But now, when he gave his statement, what was his reasoning for? Because the body wasn't like right out in the open. What was his reasoning for walking through there and stumbling on his body?
Well, first of all, he wasn't interviewed for a year. So you have several little investigations, the Park Police, the FBI, the Fisk report, and all that kind of stuff, and none of them talk to the first person who arrives for a year. So to first answer your question, nobody asked him any questions. Secondly, he did not offer any contradiction to the Fisk report or the Starr report, because those reports said that he had this old antique revolver in his hand. When the paramedic that was and several others that were there said it wasn't a revolver at all. It wasn't what you play Russian roulette with. It was a square 9mm pistol. And so anyway, to finish the story, so Fornshill's there. These medics arrive. They see this one kind of gun. In fact, one of the medics, Todd Hall, when he first gets there, he sees guys in the woods running away.
All right.
And he testifies to that, and it just never makes the media. It never makes the reports. It never makes the investigations. He says something to Fornshill. He says, "Hey, there's guys running away," and Fornshill just ignored him and just went on with his business. So they look at the body and they take some pictures and they examine some things and that sort of stuff. And they're there for just a couple of minutes when this other guy shows up, Sergeant Edwards. Let me get his first name.
Well, back to Fornshield. A couple questions about Fornshield. Now, you said he guarded the door at the CIA, so he was an armed guard?
I assume so. I don't know.
Yeah, okay, because we would know if he was familiar with weapons, or not.
Right.
Now, the other thing too is now what was his reason? Did he ever give a reason, even after a year when they questioned him, for why he would just happen to be walking through that park, stumbling on bodies?
Well, he didn't say that. I think what happened was there was a 911 call that alerted whatever society that there was a dead body in Fort Marcy Park.
Right.
And he supposedly heard it on the whatever it is you're listening to, some radio, scanner.
Okay.
And so he came down to the parking lot of Fort Marcy Park, and the two medics arrived at the same time, so they all heard it on the scanner. And Fornshill told the two medics to go to the left, and he went to the right. You take the high road, I'll take the low road. And, of course, Foster's body just happened to be to the right, and he went there and got there immediately. And he was there for 2 or 3 minutes before he called the medics over and said, "Hey, I found the body." So he was able to be alone with the body for 2 or 3 minutes. So anyway, so those guys do their thing. And then this guy arrives named Sergeant Bob Edwards. Edwards comes in and takes charge of the scene. He says, "Here I am. I'm in charge. I'm Sergeant Bob Edwards." And he tells Fornshill to go back to the CIA. Fornshill had taken 7 Polaroids. He took the Polaroids from Fornshill. And then he told the two medics to go on. And so he's alone with the body for a couple of minutes as well before another cast of characters arrives. And at this point, the automatic weapon turns into a old-time antique revolver. So it's pretty obvious that Sergeant Bob Edwards planted that gun. Now, Edwards was also never interviewed by any of the investigations. He finally got interviewed several years later by the Starr investigation, and that interview remains secret.
Let me ask you a question. Now, you mentioned Starr. What do you make of Starr? Because some people kind of think that he's kind of like running sheepdog for the Clintons. And then more recently, he's on the defense team for this Jeffrey Epstein guy. What is your opinion?
Well, one of the things I really liked about the Rivero interview was, and I might add this to the book since in the digital world I can make changes as we go, but I really liked his insights into Starr and the fact that apparently Starr did some dirty work for legally to prepare the way for the MENA operation.
Right.
So all that cocaine smuggling and arms stuff and Iran-Contra stuff. So he was involved in all that. So he would have come in to his Starr investigation doing Whitewater already sort of a guy on the team of the people who do secret operations and like to keep everything classified. He'd be right on board with that. So that was a very good insight that I'd like to look more into. And then, of course, I've heard you talk about him defending Epstein, which, there's nothing good can come out of that. We live in a world, Ed, where there's so much blackmail, and not all of us are humans. So, if you're playing in that world, which Ken Starr was clearly playing in, and you got people tailing you, and you got ways to document things. You have a bad night, you could be owned forever. So Ken Starr's behavior is very troubling to me. He taught Sunday school to fourth graders, and he had the whole good Christian image. But when the lead prosecutor comes to you and tells you that he's got all the evidence to show that Vince Foster was murdered, and that his higher-ups, which were the number 2 and 3 men under Starr, were throwing chairs in his office and threatening him personally and telling him to back off, and Starr does nothing about it. I'm over the Christian thing and the Sunday school being taught to fourth graders and all this stuff, and I'm looking at other types of problems and motives.
Yeah, and Clinton, from when his background as being I believe he's Attorney General of Arkansas, would see the benefit of having the opposition in your pocket, and would know he would have a better appreciation for the benefit of having that guy in place for you, the guy who's chasing you and prosecuting you, on your side.
I guess when you get up to those very high levels, they're pretty savvy.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
So
let me mention a couple things.
Sure.
So that was one example of. It wasn't really FBI fraud, but the FBI certainly gets into it. But one of the reasons I think this story is important, for a lot of reasons. One is, it's a micro story. I mean, we know society's corrupt. We know there's all this weird stuff going on with 9/11 and these organized shootings and all that kind of stuff, and there's just all sorts of intelligence operations related to it and that kind of thing. But it all gets so overwhelming that you don't know what to do about it, and sometimes it's helpful to just focus on one little thing.
Okay.
So like to use an example, and I don't know how conspiratorial you'll get, whatever, and I don't want people to go crazy and go on a rabbit trail, but like a lot of people when I make Facebook posts about questioning things like exactly what happened at Sandy Hook and whether, it really happened the way the government told us, one of the things that really helps is just to focus on this one guy who's supposedly a parent, who was an actor, who also appeared as a SWAT team member on the day of Sandy Hook. And, you just kind of focus in on something simple like that, and it allows people to not be overwhelmed by all the information and just look at one thing and say, well, gosh, if they'd lied to us about that, I guess they're able to lie to us about a lot of these other things too. And it's a helpful way to kind of move the ball forward. So this story is a micro story, and it tells you a couple of things. Instead of just saying, well, the Clintons are so corrupt. Oh, the Clintons are so corrupt. Gosh, it's just one thing after another. The Clinton body count, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's okay. Let's look at this one story. Let's look at this Vince Foster story. Let's look what happened. Let's look how Hillary was related to him. Let's look at the fact that Vince Foster was the guy that was hiring goons to threaten Bill's women. Let's look at the fact, of all this corruption in the investigation and the cover-up, the involvement with the FBI lying so much, and, we'll get into more details about that. But once you do it in a micro way, it allows people to say, I guess in this situation, the Clintons are pretty darn corrupt. So I guess, they could easily be corrupt in other ways. So that's one reason why this story is important. Another one is this is a early, well, I don't know about an early, it probably been happening for decades, but this is a really good example of a crime scene where a couple of people from the CIA, a couple of people from the FBI get involved very early on, and they're the only ones who are dealing with the body, with the evidence, with the documents, and with the witnesses. It's the same 2 or 3 FBI agents, very corrupt, very deceitful, who are involved in this investigation from beginning to end. They're the ones who testified to the Senate Whitewater Committee. They're the ones who worked for Starr. They're the ones who worked for Fisk. It was the same guys. And they were planting evidence. They were telling lies. They were twisting stuff. So if you only got 3 or 4 or 5 characters that are involved right at the level of the crime, dealing with the primary evidence, you really can pull off massive deceptions and massive frauds. And this is what we've seen again and again at an even deeper level in our society. Every time there's some massive tragedy or whatever, it's like immediately the federal government takes over the crime scene in about, 10 minutes. And then everything you get from the news media is, well, according to the federal source, according to the Pentagon. And all you've got is you just got a handful of people that are involved, and you don't really know what's really going on. So this is a good micro story to kind of point that out as well.
Okay, Dean, we're going to take a commercial break right now. We're with Dean Arnold, and he's the author of Hillary Invents, A Story of Love, Death, and Cover-Up, and you can find that book on Amazon.com. Dean's website, one of his websites, is bluebridge.com, BLOOBRIDGE.com. We'll be right back with more of these messages, the story of Vince Foster and Hillary Clinton, right after these messages. This is your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. And if you're enjoying this show right now, there's more. You can get more. You can go to the Ed Opperman YouTube channel, and you could subscribe there. And we have archives of all of our past shows for over the past 3 years, about 200, 300 shows. You can also go to the Opperman Report Spreaker channel, and you could follow us there. Again, a ton of shows, about 300 shows on there. And whenever we do an impromptu show, an emergency type broadcast that we do during the week occasionally, you'll get an email notifying you of breaking news and spontaneous broadcasts that we may do during the week. You can also go to OppermanReport.com and become a member. If you become a member, you help support the free archives on Spreaker and YouTube, and you help support the free shows on Friday evening and on Saturday evening. Each of these shows, Friday evening and Saturday evening, are carried for free on 7 internet stations, okay? So you help support that, but also, too, at OppermanReport.com in the members section, we have exclusive content. Shows that are recorded during the week that are only available to members. So please check out OppermanReport.com and help support the show.
The son of a Polish immigrant who grew up in a Brooklyn tenement, Bernie Sanders. He went to public schools, then college, where the work of his life began, fighting injustice and inequality, speaking truth to power. Bernie moved to Vermont, won election and praise as one of America's best mayors. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families and for principle, opposing the Iraq War, supporting veterans. Now he's taking on Wall Street and a corrupt political system that holds up a rigged economy. Bernie's campaign is funded by over 1 million small contributions from people like you. He's fighting for living wages, equal pay, and tuition-free public colleges. Bernie Sanders.
People are sick and tired of establishment politics, and they want real change.
Bernie Sanders, husband, father, grandfather, an honest leader, building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Check out strawmanmusic.com. Sean Duff is our webmaster here at the Opperman Report, and he's a very talented musician. He's part of a band called Strawman. They're based up there in Canada. Don't hold that against them. These are like-minded folks. If you like the shows you hear on the Opperman Report, You'll like the music that they have over at strawmanmusic.com.
Enough is enough. Wall Street's greed and illegal behavior drove this country into the worst economic downturn since the 1930s. And then, after getting a huge taxpayer bailout because they were too big to fail, it turns out that 3 out of the 4 largest banks are bigger today than they were before we bailed them out. That's crazy. I'm Bernie Sanders. My plan: break up the big banks who are strangling our economy and make them pay their fair share of taxes. Then we can invest in the middle class, expand Social Security, and provide universal college education. I'll rein in Wall Street behavior so they can't crash our economy again. Will they like me? No. Will they begin to play by the rules if I'm president? You better believe it. I'm Bernie Sanders, Democratic candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
You know, you can get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, if you go to my website, emailrevealer.com. Now, this is a limited edition book, okay? And you can get a signed copy of this book, and it'll be personally autographed to you or whoever you want to give the book to as a gift. Once you have my signature on that book, you can copy the signature and put it on checks and pass them all over the world. Emailrevealer.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator.
He's fought injustice and inequality his whole life. Bernie Sanders. As a college student, he was arrested for challenging segregated housing. Bernie marched with Dr. King and thousands of others for civil rights. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families on health care and jobs. Now he's taking on Wall Street banks and a corrupt political system that keeps in place a rigged economy. Bernie Sanders, a reformer who believes in ending racial profiling and mass incarceration so the justice system works for everyone. Bernie Sanders.
There is no president who will fight harder to end institutional racism and reform our broken criminal justice system.
Bernie Sanders, an honest leader building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here today with Dean Arnold, and we're discussing his book, Hillary and Vince, a story of love, death, and cover-up. And it's the death of Vince Foster we're talking about. Dean, just to jump around a little bit, a couple of questions. What do you believe, if it wasn't a suicide, what do you believe the motive was for the murder of Vince Foster?
Well, in the book at the end, I give 3 possibilities of who killed Vince Foster. And I'm not convinced that it has to be one of those 3, but these are 3 good guesses. Okay. The first one is that it had to do with the Waco incident. To refresh people's memory, about, just 2 or 3 months into the Clinton administration, 1993, federal troops surrounded the compound in Waco, Texas, of the Branch Davidian religious group, and basically, whoever you believe, but it's pretty clear that the federal government fired first, and the whole place burned down, and 80-some people were killed, and
a bunch of little kids,
and a lot of children, and and it was a pretty horrible event. A lot of people were upset. Vince Foster, the day he died, was working on a memo about Waco, according to his assistant. And his wife testified that he was deeply, deeply troubled about what happened. And then we've got some other investigators who look at phone records and see that Hillary Clinton, Vince Foster, and Webb Hubbell were constantly on the phone with each other right around the Waco event. And and then what happened, and that there's other evidence that Hillary was leaning very heavily on Janet Reno to make a move on it. There was also a folder, a manila folder that had Waco written on it that was put in the safe of the White House Counsel. Another assistant saw that. And so for those reasons and some others, there's some belief that Foster was involved in knowing some things about Waco, how it went down, Hillary's connection to it, and other things that, it's pretty clear that he was about to blow, testify, turn. And there's some other things he could have done that on, Whitewater, Travel Gate, and that kind of thing. But if it was Waco, it wouldn't be just Hillary. In fact, it might not mainly be Hillary. It might be people in the military-industrial complex who didn't want that exposed. And so that's theory one, that forces behind that didn't want something about Waco exposed. Number two,
just to interject here, too, if you look into the Waco situation, brother, there was a lot of stuff where it could have been negotiated. At the very end of negotiations, it could have been negotiated, a peaceful settlement. But they wouldn't let, what's that guy, a Branch Davidian guy, what's his name, Koresh. They wouldn't let his mother come and talk to him. She showed up there, and wanted to talk to him. They wouldn't let her talk to him. So they were doing stuff with flags, and it was a bizarre, hostile situation where at the very end there was a death sentence placed on those guys by the agents there on the ground. So just to add into that, now what were the other two motives he might have?
Second one is that he was killed by the Dixie Mafia, Hot Springs, Arkansas, where they were all close to, in Little Rock, was considered the number one illegal gambling center of the United States back in those days, and huge hotbed for organized crime. And then the Clintons were deeply involved in what became Iran-Contra and the smuggling of guns down to Nicaragua and then bringing back massive amounts of cocaine to be sold to fund the clandestine operation. This is all documented. It's in conspiracy. And Bill Clinton was governor and attorney general during that time. And Vince Foster was deeply involved in it. Investigator or journalist Ambrose Evans Pritchard has written extensively on this. He went down and interviewed the wife of a murdered bodyguard for the Clintons, who was keeping a file on Bill's infidelities. But he was also being paid $1,000 a week to drive to Mena, deliver something, and he had in the trunk of his wife found in the trunk of his car $100 bills filled. It was stacked all the way to the top where she could hardly get the trunk closed again. She was going to the grocery store to buy some groceries. She opens up the trunk to put the groceries in, and the trunk is filled with $100 bills, and she can't get the trunk closed. And she goes into her husband and she says, "What the heck are you doing?" And she throws a pack of $100 bills at him. She says, "Are you running drugs?" And he said, "Just don't say anything about it." He says, "Vince Foster." He was friends with Vince. He said, Vince has me doing it. I get $1,000 a week. Just don't ask any questions and you'll be better off. Anyway, so Ambrose Pritchard Evans interviews this widow of this guy and gets all this information. Anyway, that's a taste of how crazy the corruption is. Well, Vince is in the middle of all that. And so theory number two is that because of his connection of all that and because of the Whitewater investigation starting to heat up, that he was maybe considering either resigning or turning state's evidence or something that would just make it look bad. And so the Dixie Mafia had him taken out. That doesn't even get into Dan Lassiter and his cocaine connection and all the hundreds of billions and bonds that he was running in Arkansas and Vince's connection to that. Theory three is kind of similar, but it's basically that the Clintons themselves killed him because several things were happening. Vince Foster was in charge of the blind trust, that you have to put all your assets in a blind trust when you become president. Right. And every other president had done it by inauguration day. Well, they were 6 months into it, and Vince Foster still hadn't done it, and he was the one who had to sign the document. And if the corruption gets exposed, he's the one who goes to jail. Also, he was deeply involved in Travelgate, where 7 employees of the travel office for the White House were just perfunctorily fired for no good reason. And then when people started to look into it, there was all sorts of intimidation tactics and stuff. Hillary was directly behind it all. And Bob Dole had called, I think the week before, had called for an investigation of Travelgate. So you got those two things, and you got a couple other things that are just things associated with the Clintons that if it came out, it was going to be another Watergate, where Vince Foster is going to be the Ehrlichman or the whistleblower, and everybody's going to go to jail, but some less than others because they've said something. So the theory there is that he was taken out by the Clintons themselves because he was about to turn state's witness.
And now, what was this you mentioned before, that he was responsible for hiring the goons that were threatening all these Clinton women?
Yes. He. I can find the actual source for that, but the Clintons hired Investigative Group International, owned by a guy named Terry Linsner. He admitted to the Washington Post, I think, that he was investigating Bill's women, and all these women around the same time. There's a couple other detectives that were named, a guy named Pelicano, a guy named Palladino, and all around the same time, all these women of Bill are getting threatened. They say to Kathleen Willey, they take her cat and they say, I hope, what did they say to her? You're not getting the message. And then they said to Sally Perdue, we don't want to see anything happen to your pretty little legs. Jennifer Flowers' friend who lived next door, who was an attorney, who was secretly taping Bill Clinton coming in and out, he got beat to a pulp, several bones broken. I could go on and on and on of the just the crime and the corruption, but these women were heavily threatened.
Okay, and
they all said threat.
You have a record that Foster was behind hiring these PIs.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Because and people should, I tell you, while you're looking for it, and people should remember that Pelicano is in prison right now, okay, for massive wiretapping and also all kinds of threats and intimidation stuff. And the lawyer for Michael Jackson, forget it. And also for he had C4 explosives in his safe, and I believe a hand grenade as well when they came in and finally arrested him. Okay, so you have information that Foster was behind hiring these guys. Now, the day of the murder, though, right? He doesn't. There's no record of him signing out of the White House.
Right.
Is that true?
Yeah, it's true. They say that he walked. They say that he walked from the White House across the street over to the executive office building or somewhere. And so since he didn't take his car, there was no reason for him to sign out.
Really? Now, did you find that that's actual policy?
No, I haven't looked into it. It sounds to me like at the White House you would be able to just frolic to and fro without checking in and out, doesn't it?
Well, I have that guy coming on, the guy that just wrote the book, that guy Byrne. I have him coming on like next week, and before July 7th, I have him coming on. The Secret Service agent just wrote that book, so I can check that with him.
It doesn't make sense that they would allow him to do that. And that right there, those very last moments, it's all pretty unsure exactly what happened. But they asked him those questions at the Senate banking hearings. They're like, well, didn't you check the records? They kept, I think Senator D'Amato kept asking this FBI agent Larry Monroe, who's just corrupt to the core, kept asking, well, didn't y'all check with the White House security guard in terms of when he went out? And he never would answer the question. He just said, well, we've just determined that he left about 1:15. Well, did you check the records? Well, can't say we checked the records necessarily, but we from our investigation, we've determined that he left about 1:15. So they kept dodging the question. By the way, Larry Monroe, who was just lied 15 different ways in this thing, was also the key spokesman for the FBI for Oklahoma City bombing.
Oh, that's interesting too. Okay, yeah, the same guys over and over. The usual suspects, they say sometimes. Now,
this is from Joyce Milton's book, The First Partner. She said Vince Foster kept the list for Hillary of all the bimbos and eventually helped her hire private detectives both to monitor the activities and warn the women if they talked.
Just amazing, Now, Now, the thing is, though, do you believe that the murder occurred inside the White House or occurred in the park?
I don't know. The tamest theory you could come up with is that he did commit suicide, but he did it in Hillary's bed or something, and so they had to go take him someplace else.
Right.
And that's why there was carpet fibers all over him. That's why there was blonde hairs all over his pants, underwear, belt, socks, and shoes. Another reason why there might have been blonde hairs all over him is because one of the early witnesses on the scene saw sitting there. There was a couple out in the woods at Fort Marcy Park. They were having a tryst, an illicit tryst, and so they remain anonymous, but they testified to the FBI that they were out there, and they saw this big, burly, bare-chested guy with long blonde hair walking into the woods up where Vince Foster was found dead. None of this ever makes media. None of it ever makes any of the investigations. All the investigations and all the reports say, well, nothing unusual happened. But that's another reason why there might have been blonde hairs. But by the way, getting back to the Fort Marcy Park and the parking lot, the main character of my book is Patrick Knowlton, who was a witness on the scene. Let's just talk about him a little bit.
But before we get to Knowlton, and by the way, Knowlton's a fascinating guy, and myself, I would love to interview him. When I was talking to Rivera last time, he's the one that jumped out at me the most, because he was like terrorized for years. Knowlton, correct?
I don't know about terrorized for years, but he certainly was terrorized. I think once he filed a lawsuit and it was making its way up the judiciary to the Supreme Court, I think they kind of stayed away from him because he'd gotten so public. But yeah, he's a very interesting character. He was a registered Democrat, and he was just headed to some place to do a carpentry job. He had to take a leak, and so he pulls off at Fort Marcy Park to go take a leak. And
okay, before we get to Knowlton, we'll do the whole Knowlton thing, because I guess we'll do another hour. Okay.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Now, do you believe that this was planned in advance or it was spontaneous?
Okay, yeah, I got off on that suicide thing. I don't think it was suicide. I think it was murder. I think because of all the stuff about the exit wounds and the way he was shot and everything, I don't think it was suicide. Right. And where it was done, one of the working theories, maybe the best theory, is when he walked across the street over the old executive office building, he was headed toward the offices of Kennedy. I forget the guy's first name. He was a Rose law firm attorney, close friends with Vince Foster, and then a woman named Marsh. Last name is Marsh. I'll get her first name in a minute. But she had sex with Clinton the night of Foster's murder. She was one of his women, Marcia Scott. That's her name. Anyway, they were both over there. So the theory is that he was heading in that direction, and wherever he got taken out, it was something related to that. But here's what I think happened.
Wait, stop 1 second. How do we know that Marcia Scott had sex with Clinton that night?
One of her colleagues testifies to that. I need to have an index in this book so I can pull up Marcia Scott and then tell you the exact answer to that right away. But I think it was sworn testimony of one of her colleagues. It's another woman, and I think the name rings a bell. I'll have to find it as we're looking. But
okay, well then go back to.
But it's on record.
Okay, and it's interesting how the colleague would know. I guess who knows what's going on with these guys. But so you were saying now, and you believe that he was heading over to Kennedy's office?
Yeah.
Okay.
So really, I think, to answer your question, I think maybe 3 or 4 days before Foster was murdered, the rumblings began. I think he's because you've got a 3 or 4 day period where all these people suddenly start coming into Foster's office.
Right.
Powerful people that aren't normally there that often. And the assistants in the office, testify to all this. Webb Hubbell comes by several times. Marcia Scott comes by several times. Hillary came by several times, although she swore under oath that she didn't come over at all. She swore under oath that she hadn't seen Foster for for more than a month before he was found dead. But one of the White House staffers testified under oath that she was there several times. But that didn't come out until years later. The FBI hid that interview. But anyway, so all these powerful people come by 3 or 4 days beforehand. They ended up taking this trip right before he is found dead to the estate of basically a mobster gangster, Nathan Landau. And they spend the weekend there, and Foster's wife is getting lessons from Pam Shriver, who's a well-known tennis star. And meanwhile, Webb Hubbell and Kennedy and a couple others are having these big meetings with Vince. And of course, they say after the fact that they were trying to keep him from being depressed, but it's pretty clear that they were really leaning on him to change his mind about, talking about whatever he was going to talk about. Now, and then he's finally found dead. Now, one of the funniest anecdotes in my book, I think, is that the Wall Street Journal reports that the weekend that Hubbell is trying to lean on Foster to get him to turn, Hubbell broke his elbow. He had a broken elbow. He was in a sling.
Okay.
But somebody's breaking Webb Hubbell's bones to get him to change Vince Foster's position.
Oh, so there's no other explanation of how Hubbell broke his arm?
Oh, I'm sure somebody has some explanation.
Well, what do you make of the theory that Hubbell and Hillary also had an affair?
Yeah, that's mentioned.
What do you think?
Poor taste in men, but other than that,
because
I just got a anecdote from a friend who is close. Spent some time with one of Hillary's bodyguards.
Okay.
And he told her, or he told my friend that the immorality and the sordid debauchery was so bad he just had to scrape it off of him. It was so filthy. So I imagine these people slept with all sorts of things.
Yeah, and when you look now, we know for an absolute fact, that Bill Clinton's been on this Jeffrey Epstein's plane. At one time with a porn star was on, a softcore porn star was on there. It's in the record. But he was on there like 24 times, and about 5 of those times he ditched his Secret Service. This is a convicted pedophile, and whose behavior has been documented by his own butler. 3 little girls a day he's molesting, 3 little girls a day. And this is he has 24 different phone numbers to contact the Clintons, and Clinton's on his plane 24 times, at least 4 of those times without the Secret Service. So you just gotta wonder what these people are up to. This might be a good time to take another commercial break, and when we get back, uninterrupted, we'll get into the whole Knowlton story. Okay, without any of my jumping around.
That's all right.
Sometimes when you're questioning somebody, you jump around a little bit to catch them up. And I always feel guilty when I start jumping around. But I had so many questions I wanted to get covered. Okay, we'll be back with more of Dean Arnold. Guy's done a lot of work on this Vince Foster story, that's for sure. Investigative reporter. The book is called Hillary and Vince, A Story of Love, Death, and Cover-Up. And Dean's website is bluebridge.com, BLOOBRIDGE.com. And we're going to be right back with more of this just an incredible Vince Foster story right after these messages. This is your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. And if you're enjoying this show right now, there's more. You can get more. You can go to the Ed Opperman YouTube channel, and you could subscribe there. And we have archives of all of our past shows for over the past 3 years, about 200, 300 shows. You can also go to the Opperman Report Spreaker channel, and you could follow us there. Again, a ton of shows, about 300 shows on there. And whenever we do an impromptu show, an emergency type broadcast that we do during the week occasionally, you'll get an email notifying you of breaking news and spontaneous broadcasts that we may do during the week. You can also go to OppermanReport.com and become a member. If you become a member, you help support the free archives on Spreaker and YouTube, and you help support the free shows on Friday evening and on Saturday evening. Each of these shows, Friday evening and Saturday evening, are carried for free on 7 internet stations, okay? So you help support that, but also, too, at OppermanReport.com in the members section, we have exclusive content. Shows that are recorded during the week that are only available to members. So please check out OppermanReport.com and help support the show.
The son of a Polish immigrant who grew up in a Brooklyn tenement, Bernie Sanders. He went to public schools, then college, where the work of his life began, fighting injustice and inequality, speaking truth to power. Bernie moved to Vermont, won election and praise as one of America's best mayors. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families and for principle, opposing the Iraq War, supporting veterans. Now he's taking on Wall Street and a corrupt political system that holds up a rigged economy. Bernie's campaign is funded by over 1 million small contributions from people like you. He's fighting for living wages, equal pay, and tuition-free public colleges. Bernie Sanders.
People are sick and tired of establishment politics, and they want real change.
Bernie Sanders. Husband, father, grandfather. An honest leader. Building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Check out strawmanmusic.com. Sean Duff is our webmaster here at the Opperman Report, and he's a very talented musician. He's part of a band called Strawman. They're based up there in Canada. Don't hold that against them. These are like-minded folks. If you like the shows you hear on the Opperman Report, you'll like the music that they have over at strawmanmusic.com.
Enough is enough. Wall Street's greed and illegal behavior drove this country into the worst economic downturn since the 1930s. And then, after getting a huge taxpayer bailout because they were too big to fail, it turns out that 3 out of the 4 largest banks are bigger today than they were before we bailed them out. That's crazy. I'm Bernie Sanders. My plan: break up the big banks who are strangling our economy and make them pay their fair share of taxes. Then we can invest in the middle class, expand Social Security, and provide universal college education. I'll rein in Wall Street behavior so they can't crash our economy again. Will they like me? No. Will they begin to play by the rules if I'm president? You better believe it. I'm Bernie Sanders, Democratic candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
You know, you can get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, if you go to my website, emailrevealer.com. Now, this is a limited edition book, okay? And you can get a signed copy of this book, and it'll be personally autographed to you or whoever you want to give the book to as a gift. Once you have my signature on that book, you can copy the signature and put it on checks and pass them all over the world. Emailrevealer.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator.
He's fought injustice and inequality his whole life. Bernie Sanders. As a college student, he was arrested for challenging segregated housing. Bernie marched with Dr. King and thousands of others for civil rights. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families on health care and jobs. Now he's taking on Wall Street banks and a corrupt political system that keeps in place a rigged economy. Bernie Sanders, a reformer who believes in ending racial profiling and mass incarceration so the justice system works for everyone. Bernie Sanders.
There is no president who will fight harder to end institutional racism and reform our broken criminal justice system.
Bernie Sanders, an honest leader building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here today with Dean Arnold. He's the author of Hillary and Vince, A Story of Love, Death, and Cover-Up. You can get that book on Amazon.com. Also, too, we'll have a link to the Amazon.
Just search Hillary and Vince, and Hillary has 2 L's.
There you go. Right, Hillary, just like in Killary. It's easy to remember. And we'll have a link, too, up on the OppermanReport.com website. We just went so fast. We originally planned to do an hour, but there's so much information, and it went so quickly that, and I was interrupting so many times. We didn't get it at all into Knowlton, and we didn't even touch on Miguel Rodriguez. So I wanted to give you a chance to tell us about that stuff. So give us the story about Knowlton.
Yeah, let's do Knowlton, and don't forget to talk about Miguel Rodriguez. I got some interesting information on that.
That's a whole show in itself. The whole Rodriguez.
Isn't it though?
Because the prosecutor resigned.
Exactly. The lead prosecutor resigned.
Oh, but it's a conspiracy theory.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead, my friend.
Okay, so Patrick Knowlton is just a working Democrat going to do some construction work. Has to take a leak. Pulls off at Fort Marcy Park and pulls up. It's 4:30 in the afternoon. He pulls up, and there's a guy 2 spaces to the right in a car. The car's facing out. And when Patrick pulls up, the guy looks at him. He rolls down his window and looks over at him with a look to kill, like, get. And Knowlton's.
Oh, you know what? Your audio's breaking up.
That's weird.
Your audio's breaking up pretty bad. Are you doing anything different?
Well, your audio was kind of bad, too, so I just wonder if it's a weird connection for a second.
Okay, well, you're good now. Okay.
Okay, so he gets out of his car because he's got to take a leak, and the guy gets out of his car and just kind of leans on his car and looks at him, and so Knowlton's scared, so he just kind of walks kind of slowly, pretends like he's reading the historical marker, just kind of watching this guy, like what's going on. There's another car to the left of Knowlton, and it's an old orange tannish Honda Accord, and so Knowlton wondered if the guy was about to steal a car or take the stuff out that was inside the car or something. He didn't know why this shady-looking, kind of dark, Hispanic kind of looking guy was doing all this. But anyway, he finally gets a chance to go into some bushes and take a leak and come back, and he drives away, and that's it. And he's just kind of glad that he didn't get hurt because it was awfully weird. And when he gets home that evening, headline news. White House counsel Vince Foster found dead by gunshot in Fort Marcy Park. And he looks at the time. It's right around the time he's, taking a leak, and there's this strange character there. And he's like, gee whiz. And he talks to his girlfriend about it, and his girlfriend convinces him he really needs to call the authorities and let them know what he saw. So he's like, okay. So later that evening, he makes a couple phone calls. He calls the park police. And some receptionist was like, okay, thank you very much. Okay. And just wasn't interested. And he's like, well, God, that was weird. And the next morning he just said, his conscience got to him. He's like, it was just some receptionist who didn't know any better. I got to talk to somebody and tell them. So he makes another phone call, asks to talk to somebody in authority. He ends up talking to Detective John Rolla, who ended up being the key man on the scene eventually for the park police. Detective Rolla took his information, thanked him for it, and that was it. Patrick Knowlton never heard from anyone else again. And so they did their whole investigation without really getting more information from Patrick, including his, and all you heard was it was a suicide. They just announced, it was a suicide. No shady characters, nothing weird, nothing about the tryst in the woods by the secret tryst by this couple in the woods who testified seeing a burly, blonde-headed guy going in the woods too. So Patrick finally gets a call from the FBI 9 months later. They bring him in and they just ask him some perfunctory questions, and they just want to make sure that he saw what everybody else saw, which was a late 80s light gray Honda in the parking lot. And Knowlton's like, no, I saw an early 80s car, and it was light brown, tan. And they're like, no, with the sunlight and everything, it really could have been gray, right? No, it was light tannish orange. I saw it. It was early 80s. And he said, and this very strange guy, I could pick him out of the lineup if you tried to find some people. And they was like, okay, thank you. They called him in for one more interview, and the day of that interview, he had an older vintage Peugeot that, when he parked it downtown, some guy came up with a crowbar and bashed in his front headlights and his back rear lights. And he didn't connect it to his interview. He just thought he had bad luck that day. So that was the end of it. And so he just let it go. He didn't want to cause any trouble. He gets a call one day from the Washington, D.C. correspondent for the London Telegraph, for one of the most prestigious papers in the world, Ambrose Evans Pritchard. And Pritchard had tracked him down because his FBI interview had gotten into the public record through the Senate Senate Banking Committee hearings. And so Pritchard's starts asking him some questions. And he's like, and he finds out all this stuff about a strange man at the scene and all the discrepancies about the car. And he says, well, the FBI, they said that it was you said that it was a late model Honda, late 80s. He says, no, I didn't say it was late 80s. And they said, in the FBI report here, it says that you couldn't pick him out of a line, that you couldn't recognize the man. And Knowlton got real angry. He's like, I told him specifically I could put him out of a lineup. So they doctored his interview, never told him about it, and Knowlton was furious. And so he agreed to an interview with Pritchard. And I call him Ambrose. Let's just call him Ambrose because it's easier to say and easier to remember. So Ambrose does a lead story in the London Telegraph the next day. Got a picture of the menacing man and all kind of stuff. So overnight, Patrick Knowlton kind of becomes worldwide news. And that same day, the grand jury that was investigating the incident, the death, who had never contacted him, wasn't interested in information. That day that the story came out, they issued a subpoena to talk to him. So he goes and testifies to the grand jury. That was a mess. He was, but on his way, or a couple days before the grand jury hearing, and this is kind of the stuff you were alluding to, Ed, he and his girlfriend take a walk in the evening. And as they're taking a walk, this one man in a suit kind of comes up to them as they're walking by, and he just stops and he just stares at them and won't stop staring at him. And they're like, God, this is weird, whatever. And they kind of walk by. And then another guy comes from another direction and does the same thing. And then another guy comes up and kind of brushes up against him. And then another guy, or two guys, come drive behind him slowly in a car. And then another guy in regular clothes comes at him from another direction across the street. And this keeps going on over about a 15-minute period. There was about 25 different people that did this. And it freaked them out royally. They came home, and he calls Ambrose Evans Pritchard and says, actually, I think he called another reporter that he had contact with, Christopher Ruddy, and says, what the heck's going on? And Ruddy comes over there and looks out, and he sees all these FBI agents out there, and he calls Ambrose Evans Pritchard, and he says, you won't believe it, there's a surveillance net of about 30 FBI agents outside of Patrick's apartment. I've never seen anything like it. And so they were thinking about going and staying at someone else's house. Well, the guys finally went away, and so it kind of finally died down. Well, later on, they found out that this is a known tactic that's been used by the FBI and other forces against civil rights leaders and in other cases, and it's done for two reasons. It's done, one, to make the witness look like a lunatic when they go to the grand jury the next day. And they tell this story, and everybody thinks this guy's some kind of paranoid weirdo. Right. And it also destabilizes the witness. He's just kind of thrown off guard and that kind of stuff. So this is what happened to Patrick Knowlton. He didn't crumble, thank God. So it kind of escalated. So make a long story short, he ended up filing a lawsuit against the FBI and several other people, and that gave him the power of discovery and allowed him and his attorney friend John Clark and another friend named Hugh Turley, who was a researcher. The three of them kind of became the three amigos, and they kept going after the case and trying to crack the case. And they had the power of discovery with their lawsuit, and they dug up all sorts of information. And that case ended up going to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court didn't hear it, but because he was named as a witness in the Starr investigation, he had the right to submit a report to be concluded as an appendix to the Starr report. And Knowlton thought it was a dumb idea, but his attorney strongly suggested it, so they did it. So they had this 20-page appendix that deals with the head wound that's really not there, the gun that was fraudulent, all the false testimony, all the intimidation tactics, and all the the prosecutor resigning, all the things that really point to a murder and show that Starr's conclusion of suicide was wrong. That's all included in the Starr report as an appendix.
Back to this thing you said about how the FBI altered his original statement, right?
Yes.
Now, so there's no signed statement by him for the FBI report. This is just the FBI reporting what he said to them.
This is an interview with the FBI,
right?
And the FBI takes handwritten notes, and then they go back and they type up the handwritten notes into what's called a FBI 302 report. So it's the report of the interview.
But there's no written statement by the witness.
No, they never see it. Knowlton had never even seen his 302 until Ambrose called him and said, "I'm looking at your 302."
Okay, that's incredible. Okay, now,
and I have about 10 different specific examples of these two FBI agents doing fraudulent activity like that with the interviews. They make up stuff that people didn't say. They say people say things that they didn't say. People say certain things. The medical investigator on the scene said that he saw an orange compact car, and they didn't include it in his FBI 302 because what they had to have a late model Honda, gray Honda, in that parking lot because that was what Foster owned.
Okay.
And if Foster didn't drive his car to the parking lot, then the story doesn't make any sense. So if it's an early tannish gray Honda, it doesn't make any sense, and the story doesn't work.
Well, what's your conclusion? Do you think the Foster's car was ever in that parking lot?
Absolutely not.
Well, didn't later on they find the car and they found an oven mitt in the car that they thought was used to transport the weapon?
I heard you and Rivera talking about that. There's no photograph of that car at Fort Marcy Park.
Wow.
There's a photograph of a gray Honda that's impounded in an impounding lot. So wherever they found that car, they probably put an oven mitt in there. Who knows?
Now, what about? I always wondered where's the other mitt. You know, I always wondered. Did he? He said that the theory is the official story is that he walked off of the White House grounds. So was his car ever driven into the White House grounds that day, and how did it get out? Do we know that? Any inventory of the car coming and going? Any record?
No record.
Okay, so we don't even know if the car ever even entered the White House that day.
Right.
Okay.
There's testimony that's from his wife's FBI 302 that he was driving his two children to the White House that day.
Yeah.
But parts of that interview, right around that part of the interview, is redacted out.
Okay, that's interesting. Now,
nothing makes me madder in this book than when I read the doctoring and the falsifications and the fraud and the manipulation that takes place with these FBI interviews and the 302 reports following. It's absolute, complete corruption. And these two FBI agents who were primarily doing it, Larry Monroe and James Columbell, I think his name is, they're the same two that testified before the Senate Banking Committee, and they're just as corrupt as the day is long. They're gangsters. And the fact that people like this who wear this badge and have such respect by the American public can pull this off and do this, it makes me irate.
So these two you described, where have they wound up today in their career? What's going on with them?
I don't know. I think I actually did a little Googling trying to find them, and I couldn't find any later pictures or anything. So, like I told you, I know that Larry Monroe was the key spokesman for Oklahoma City bombing. So there you go.
Amazing. Okay, so that pretty much sums up Knowlton's story?
Well, no, there's a whole lot more to it, and my book gets into it. We can't really cover it all in this interview.
Right.
If you buy the book, you'll be reading that story. It's a fantastic story, so I'll leave that to you. But let's talk about Miguel Rodriguez.
Okay, go ahead, Miguel Rodriguez.
So there was several investigations of Foster. They kept having to punt it upstairs. The Park Police did an investigation. It was full of all sort of weirdness, so the FBI took over. But it was still filled with weirdness, so the Congress had to call or I guess the White House called for a special investigation by a guy named Robert Fisk. He issued a 60-page report, and it came out, and everybody hoped it would go away, but it just caused more questions because it was riddled with errors. And so that didn't work, and so when Ken Starr was hired to do the Starr investigation for Whitewater, for the Office of Independent Counsel, they included in his duties looking into the Foster case once again because there were so many unanswered questions. So Foster had to put together a team of people to handle that, and his lead prosecutor that he chose was someone named Miguel Rodriguez out of Sacramento, who had been involved in, I think, some mafia cases and some other stuff like that. So Miguel Rodriguez was just kind of a left coast, left winger, wore leather jackets, wore an earring once in a while, kind of had a soft smoking personality. There was a question about maybe he, was a little bit effeminate, and what might be going on there. Maybe he's gay. Maybe he's a good person to have in that spot because he's easy blackmailable. Yeah. Anyway, so Miguel Rodriguez gets in that spot, and everything is going, as hoped. When you say Ken Starr's investigation, it's not like Ken Starr and 3 or 4 people in a room and saying, okay, let's go after it. He's just kind of like a figurehead almost, and he's got a staff of, 300 people. And his top couple of assistants were very partisan Democrats. One of them was named Mark Tuohay, and another Republican was named Brent Kavanaugh, but they were very much Beltway types. They started putting pressure on Rodriguez because Miguel Rodriguez started calling the key witnesses. He started bringing them in and testifying. They were starting to testify under oath, and he started to crack the case. The Park Police started to crack underneath his interrogation. One of the Park Police officers admitted under oath that the scene had been altered. The initial crime scene had been altered. And then he started calling in these other key witnesses, and it was all starting to implode. And so these two kind of henchmen for Starr, they threw a fit and a temper tantrum, according to Miguel Rodriguez, started throwing chairs in his office and everything like this, trying to get him to stop the investigation. So he's flummoxed. Somehow involved in all this, Reed Irvin, who's head of accuracy and media, who would appear on Nightline once in a while with Ted Koppel and this, that, and the other. He gets into a relationship with Miguel Rodriguez and starts having phone conversations and getting Miguel to tell him what's really going on. Well, unbeknownst to Miguel, Reed Irving's taping all these conversations. And so I have a CD. I think Accuracy and Media published it. I don't think there's many copies out there, but I've got a CD of about 15, 20 minutes worth of phone conversations between Reed Irving and Miguel Rodriguez. And I use those quotes quite a bit in the book. And so Rodriguez is basically telling Reed Irving the whole thing is a fix. The fix is in. These people are intimidating and harassing me. And Irving is encouraging him to stick with it. You know, you can do it. Well, the next thing you know, Sid Blumenthal, who was one of Hillary's key aides, leaks to the media that they believe that somebody in the Starr investigation is gay.
Mm.
And then Rodriguez tells Reed that they're really starting to threaten him and his family. Well, Reed thought that was interesting because Miguel wasn't married. And he's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, my health and my personal life and everything is just getting really, really bad and everything. And the next thing you know, Rodriguez had resigned. So, you know, we don't know exactly all the details there. Now, the twist in the story, I don't know if you know this or not. You probably do. I can't remember if Rivera talked about it or not. But Miguel Rodriguez, just a few years later, ended up having a sex change operation and is now Michelle Rodriguez.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. So he was gay, and they were threatening to expose him. And once he finally got out of there, he kind of showed his true colors.
Yeah, by then he had nothing to lose.
I guess.
Yeah.
Now she is Michelle Rodriguez.
And does he give interviews now, or has he left this behind him? What's he doing?
Funny you should say that. I talked to him yesterday, her.
Okay. Right. What does she say?
Wasn't willing to talk. Said she couldn't give any commentary, that she never had given consent to be taped or quoted. And she couldn't confirm. She wasn't hostile. I think she probably appreciated what I'm doing. But she said there's a lot of dangerous people out there.
Oh, really?
Watch out.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, is she still practicing law?
Yeah, she's over. I don't want to give too many specifics, but she's a prosecutor in California.
Incredible. Okay, and she said, watch yourself. There's a lot of dangerous people out there.
Yep.
Oh, my God. Let me ask you something. Is there anything I failed to touch on in this story?
No, there's a few interesting tidbits. First of all, you know, in the question of why was Vince Foster killed and what really happened, you know, I don't really know. I'm not really sure. I've got 3 theories at the end of my book, but I'm not sure those are correct. But one of the things that makes me wonder if we really ever kind of figured out exactly what the deal was is, what the heck was Ambrose Pritchard Evans doing in Washington, D.C., doing nothing but covering this story for a year and a half? He's the economics finance editor for the London Telegraph in London. So, and he is also, according to some sources I have, he's pretty connected to MI6, which is the Britain's version of the CIA. So, you know, what is he doing here? Why does he have a particular interest in Vince Foster's murder and how it plays out? That's one question I have. That seems a little higher up than Whitewater or even Waco. That sounds like it has something to do with global finance or something. I don't know.
That's very interesting, too, as well. And it always seems, too, that the foreign intelligence agencies are attracted to these kind of things when they're trying to figure out what's really going on as well. Oh, boy. Okay.
Another if you're asking the question, what's another interesting tidbit or two?
Yeah.
Who's Vince Foster's assistant the day he died, who gives a lot of the testimony so that we know what happened the last few days of his death?
I believe Linda Tripp, right?
That's exactly right. So she shows up there, and then she shows up in the Pentagon taping Monica Lewinsky, and then she's also the person who tells the Kathleen Willing story for the first time.
Right, but doesn't she have some kind of Watergate background, too?
I don't know about Watergate. She's got Delta Force connection. She used to work for Delta Force, so she's some kind of plant for somebody.
It always struck me too. And when they were taking a statement at the Ken Starr Commission, and they were taking a statement of Monica Lewinsky, they said to her, "Is there anything you want to add to your statement at the end?" And the last thing she says is, "I hate Linda Tripp."
What do you make of that?
Well, that's good. Well, obviously Linda Tripp was the instigate.
Well, let me tell you why I asked the question, because I always was suspicious of that. To me, it was toucan.
Oh, really?
and it made me wonder if the whole thing was somewhat staged.
Really? Because it always struck me as a comment like a 22-year-old, a 23-year-old little girl would say.
It certainly was scripted that way, but to me, it just came across as the kind of thing you would do to just ensure that the public didn't think there was any collusion there. And that was just my take. That's all I can tell you.
Oh, very interesting. I'll have to take another look because I never actually read the whole thing or listened to the whole thing. But we just had another guest on the show, Jeffrey Giuliano, and he did a book about those tapes between Tripp and Lewinsky. Like an audio book with all the recordings between the two of them. So got to take a look at that too.
Yeah, and the more I've looked into it, the more I'm fairly convinced that Monica Lewinsky was probably about something bigger.
Yeah,
she's probably sex espionage.
Right. Yeah, it was. We're gonna have that guy. What do you think this guy Byrne then? This guy Gary Byrne, the Secret Service agent, who's saying now that Lewinsky made all these efforts to get up next to Clinton and was waiting in line with other mistresses. What do you make of all that?
I've just read the headlines, so I can't really comment on Byrne's book.
Yeah, book's not out yet. The book's not totally out yet. He's just doing these interviews, these pre-interviews. I think it'll be out by the time I interview him. I think I'm interviewing him July 7th, I believe. Okay.
I thought Rivero's comments were really interesting about the that it was released that there was an intern with the initial M that was going to come out with some devastating stuff, and the next thing you know, 2 or 3 different interns with the initial M are killed.
Yeah.
But not Monica. So that was very interesting. But I think sex espionage it's got to be pretty pervasive, and then you've got Clinton trying to broker a deal between U.S. and Israel, or right. I guess it's Palestinians and Israel, and then you've got on the transcripts of the testimony for the Starr report, Clinton telling Lewinsky he thinks the Israelis are taping him.
Right.
Anyway, so I've always been suspicious of the standard storyline about Monica Lewinsky.
See, and that brings up this thing with this email server, because obviously the Clintons have always been very concerned about the Israelis spying on them. I've always had this alternate theory that perhaps, besides avoiding the Freedom of Information Act and all the disclosure from State Department emails, is that they were. I thought that they could provide better security for their own server than they felt that the State Department could, because the State Department is so freaking infiltrated, But let's take a commercial break, and we'll be back with more of. No one seems to like that theory, by the way. I pass it around.
That's interesting.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm trying. Dean Arnold. Hillary and Vince, A Story of Love, Death, and Cover-Up. But if you just Google Hillary and Vince, it'll come up on Amazon right away. We're going to have a link on the OppermanReport.com bookstore. Also, Mr. Arnold's blog is bluebridge.com, and that's BLOO bridge.com. And we'll be right back after these messages with more. This is your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. And if you're enjoying this show right now, there's more. You can get more. You can go to the Ed Opperman YouTube channel, and you could subscribe there. And we have archives of all of our past shows for over the past 3 years, about 200, 300 shows. You can also go to the Opperman Report Spreaker channel, and you could follow us there. Again, a ton of shows, about 300 shows on there. And whenever we do an impromptu show, an emergency type broadcast that we do during the week occasionally, you'll get an email notifying you of breaking news and spontaneous broadcasts that we may do during the week. You can also go to OppermanReport.com and become a member. If you become a member, you help support the free archives on Spreaker and YouTube, and you help support the free shows on Friday evening and on Saturday evening. Each of these shows, Friday evening and Saturday evening, are carried for free on 7 internet stations, okay? So you help support that, but also, too, at OppermanReport.com in the members section, we have exclusive content. shows that are recorded during the week that are only available to members. So please check out OppermanReport.com and help support the show.
The son of a Polish immigrant who grew up in a Brooklyn tenement, Bernie Sanders. He went to public schools, then college, where the work of his life began, fighting injustice and inequality, speaking truth to power. Bernie moved to Vermont, won election and praise as one of America's best mayors. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families and for principle, opposing the Iraq War, supporting veterans. Now he's taking on Wall Street and a corrupt political system that holds up a rigged economy. Bernie's campaign is funded by over 1 million small contributions from people like you. He's fighting for living wages, equal pay, and tuition-free public colleges. Bernie Sanders.
People are sick and tired of establishment politics, and they want real change.
Bernie Sanders. Husband, father, grandfather, an honest leader, building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Check out strawmanmusic.com. Sean Duff is our webmaster here at the Opperman Report, and he's a very talented musician. He's part of a band called Strawman. They're based up there in Canada. Don't hold that against them. These are like-minded folks. If you like the shows you hear on the Opperman Report, you'll like the music that they have over at strawmanmusic.com.
Enough is enough. Wall Street's greed and illegal behavior drove this country into the worst economic downturn since the 1930s. And then, after getting a huge taxpayer bailout because they were too big to fail, it turns out that 3 out of the 4 largest banks are bigger today than they were before we bailed them out. That's crazy. I'm Bernie Sanders. My plan: break up the big banks who are strangling our economy and make them pay their fair share of taxes. Then we can invest in the middle class, expand Social Security, and provide universal college education. I'll rein in Wall Street behavior so they can't crash our economy again. Will they like me? No. Will they begin to play by the rules if I'm president? You better believe it. I'm Bernie Sanders, Democratic candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
You know, you can get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, if you go to my website, emailrevealer.com. Now, this is a limited edition book, okay? And you can get a signed copy of this book, and it'll be personally autographed to you or whoever you want to give the book to as a gift. Once you have my signature on that book, you can copy the signature and put it on checks and pass them all over the world. Emailrevealer.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator.
He's fought injustice and inequality his whole life. Bernie Sanders. As a college student, he was arrested for challenging segregated housing. Bernie marched with Dr. King and thousands of others for civil rights. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families on health care and jobs. Now he's taking on Wall Street banks and a corrupt political system that keeps in place a rigged economy. Bernie Sanders, a reformer who believes in ending racial profiling and mass incarceration so the justice system works for everyone. Bernie Sanders.
There is no president who will fight harder to end institutional racism and reform our broken criminal justice system.
Bernie Sanders, an honest leader building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and we're here today with our guest, Dean Arnold. His website is bluebridge.com. That's BLOO. And the book we're talking about today is Hillary and Vince, A Story of Love, Death, and Cover-Up. And you get a link to that book on OppermanReport.com. Let me ask you a question. Are you there? Oh, I got this problem here with Skype. Okay, you there?
I'm right here. You got me?
Yeah, because when I updated my Skype, It won't let me adjust the volume in Skype anymore when I take that little break, and I got to actually move it to a different kind of. I change it from one speaker to another speaker. It's kind of,
okay, gotcha. All right.
I know. But now, just recently, when Trump did mention the Vince Foster case, now you must have got all excited and said, "Oh boy, let me, wait for Fox News to call me up to come down and do an interview." Were you surprised to see that it was everything was again covered up so quickly?
Well, that didn't surprise me. I will tell you an interesting story. I don't necessarily think there's a connection, but there might be, so it's worth sharing.
Okay.
I'm good friends with the chief of staff of one of the top people in Congress. I'm not going to say who it is.
Okay.
But let him know about the book, and he liked it, and he sent it off to Jeffrey Sessions' people because they're close with Sessions. And Sessions is kind of partially like running the Trump campaign or something. And a week after that happened, Trump talked about Foster in the news. And when I saw it, I was like, awesome, Trump's talking about Vince Foster. This is perfect timing. My book hadn't come out yet. My book came out about 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later. So I thought, this is great timing. It'll help my book. And then I got to thinking, I wonder if, if Trump heard that there was another book coming out or something, and it gave him confidence to talk about the issue, or maybe he even glanced at it. I think there's an outside chance. I can't confirm it.
Yeah, but no, I wouldn't be surprised at all, because it is true. It's amazing what the average person, or the person a person who's trying to insert themselves into things, the kind of changes you can make, and the influence, the effect you can have, even on the presidential election. The average person doesn't believe that kind of stuff can happen, but it does, and I've seen it. I've seen it many, many times. So yeah. God bless you, man.
I hope it's the case, but I was like, heck yeah, man, this is good. Now, part of my, peddling it around like that was I was trying to get some kind of major publisher to pick it up.
Right. And
I didn't get any interest at that level, so I've self-published it through Amazon and print on demand. So that didn't happen, but, it is possible that he got to talking about it because he had been shown this manuscript with 300 footnotes, incredibly documented, showing all the corruption.
Yeah, sure. And sitting on a plane like 5 hours a day, even more sometimes. I wouldn't be surprised, because it doesn't seem like he's doing that much other research any kind of preparation for his job as president. Now, you're going to go for the Libertarian candidate this year, right?
I don't know about that. I think I'm actually going to vote for Trump.
Really?
Yeah, it depends on how good of a job you do on these exposés of his relationship with Epstein.
Yeah, there's a lot coming up, man.
That's I made a Facebook post about his friendly quote about Epstein about a year ago. My position on Trump is I see a lot of good there in terms of the way he could turn some things, but I give it about a 30% chance that he's just rotten and corrupt to the core. The whole thing is a psyop, and that it'll be worse than anything we could ever have. So it is a risk. And the stuff about Epstein is certainly part of the stuff that gives me pause. So, we'll see.
Yeah, well, when you look at this affidavit from this Tiffany Doe, who, because this second lawsuit, the one that's filed up in New York State there, was filed by a real attorney who has a real practice with partners and everything. This is a real guy. He's a patent attorney. He doesn't have a lot of experience in this kind of law, but he took on this case. So he's putting his license on the line for this. And he attached this affidavit from this Tiffany Doe, who said she worked for Epstein and has knowledge of all this stuff. There's no way any legitimate attorney is going to attach an affidavit without the basic due diligence of verifying that this kid actually worked for Epstein at one point or another. And it appears to be that he has. And even Lisa Bloom, the daughter of, who's that woman? Gloria Allred, just wrote an article yesterday in the Huffington Post saying that we have to take this lawsuit much more serious than people are doing. which is when you stop and consider, you got a presidential candidate here being sued for rape of a 13-year-old, and as a witness, you know.
Yeah, no, I'm interested to hear more about that. And I'll just tell you, I'm somewhere between Ron Paul and Pat Buchanan, kind of in my political views, and I like a lot of sort of the America Firster stuff that Trump is championing, but that's not really why I'm voting for him, unless you persuade me not to. I'm voting for him because of foreign policy. He's the only candidate that I can see who's really talking about pulling out of the Middle East, and also wants to have good diplomatic relationships with Russia. Everybody else is just beating war drums and acting like insane mad people. Wow. And so for those reasons, I like Trump, with the caveat that it could be pretty bad.
I guess you might have missed last night's town hall with Trump.
What do you say?
They asked him about. In fact, it was a pretty hostile question. The question was, some old guy gets up and mentions some comments about the Zionists in Israel, and we have to stop supporting them. And Trump came out and said, "Oh, no. Israel is our number one friend in the Middle East, and we're going to do everything to support them. I'm going to be their biggest supporter." So he's taking the pledge, man. Did you listen to the show I had with Cynthia McKinney when she talks about the Israeli lobby?
I don't think I heard that one.
It's the first time I interviewed her. And I said to her, the first time I ever interviewed a congresswoman, and I said, well, how does it work with these lobbies? Do they take you out to dinner and then they drop an envelope on the floor and say, hey, you picked that up? How does that work, Right. Where they're making their payoff. And she goes, oh, no. They send a fax over to your office. And it says, I pledge to support Israel on this, and that. And you check it off and you sign it. And then they send you a certain amount of money every month. That's how it goes. So, yeah.
Makes it easy.
Yeah, right. There's not much finesse there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You got to fax it back.
Some people kind of freaked out when Trump spoke to AIPAC,
right.
And I just kind of felt like, well, you're running for office like this, you kind of gotta play both sides a little bit. You got to play a little politics. He's also, he also had that very strong statement where he said he would love to broker peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. That would be a dream of his, to bring peace to them. And he was not willing to publicly at that point take sides. He says, how can I take a side if I'm going to be a broker of peace? That's a pretty strong statement to make. He's had to backtrack a little bit, obviously, but when he's just dealing from his hip pocket and using common sense, he's saying the right things. When he finally realizes that he's got to deal with this 800-pound gorilla, he backtracks a little bit. He also hadn't figured out the Israelis don't want any peace, and so to even mention the idea is a bad idea, but whatever.
Yeah, and he also had to go sit and kiss Kissinger's ring too. So, listen, who knows? Who knows? We'll see what happens. If there's any hope. But this is definitely, you said, how old were you? 50? I wrote it down. 50-something, you said?
52.
Yeah, 52. Yeah, I'm 53. I'm going to be 54 in November. You got to admit, this is the oddest election you've ever seen in your lifetime.
No doubt.
I've never seen anything like this. It's just, even with all these Clinton murders and allegations and stuff, but I've never seen a more corrupt group than the Clintons, and just untouchable, and they get away with everything.
Well, what's very disheartening to me is that I think just the Democratic Party in general is just corrupt. There's no such thing now as right and wrong. It's just my guy or your guy.
Yeah. And so you don't have any problem with these Tea Party people, just shutting everything down and no votes and.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, like how the House is totally shut down. Nothing gets through the House anymore because pretty much the Tea Party shuts everything down. They never let anything get out of the House.
Well, that's another conversation. I'm a grassroots conservative, and
right.
we kind of think that when you shut down the House, you're doing something good. But,
and now you wound up in Tennessee because you were going to go into the ministry?
My dad was a pastor,
okay.
And I went to a conservative Presbyterian liberal arts college here on top of Lookout Mountain called Covenant College, and that's how I ended up in Chattanooga. And I had some aspirations for ministry, and I'm very devout in what I do. I'm actually now Eastern Orthodox. That's a whole other story. But so I was very involved early on in Christian Coalition and the pro-life movement and all that kind of activism, Operation Rescue, and that sort of thing. And I didn't really graduate from my moral underpinnings on all that. I think that those causes are kind of lost in terms of the social issues. All we got left is, can we put somebody in who won't go overseas and kill millions of people with brown skin? And so that's kind of where I've moved. George W. Bush just completely ruined the idea of the Republican Party, representing something to do with God. For me, I mean, it's not that it's not possible, but it's just I vote. My main issue is the corruption of the U.S. government and the military-industrial complex. What can we do to sort of abet it and keep it from being so bad? So I've supported candidates like Pat Buchanan, Ron Paul, and now Trump because of some of the things he said.
And what is your feeling about the theory that the Bush crime family is pretty much part of the same Clinton crime family? It's the same, the Mena Airport, all that stuff, that they're both part of the same crime family.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a plausible theory. Mm-hmm. I mean, was it Russell Welch or Terry Reid or somebody who had the eyewitness account of them having a meeting over at Mena, where George Bush is there and Clinton's there and Oliver North is there and they're all sitting around talking strategy. Yeah. I think it's a plausible theory. I don't know. I go back and forth on how corrupt George H.W. Bush is, but it could be pretty bad.
Now, real quick, because now you got me going here. Now, your dad was a pastor. Dad was a pastor, right? Like an evangelical pastor. What was he? What denomination was your dad?
Yeah, general evangelical, became a conservative Presbyterian later in life. But your typical Bible beating, hardcore fundamentalist type. Okay,
because I'm Assemblies of God. Now, but now you became Eastern Orthodox Church. That's like a Catholic kind of thing, right?
Well, better than Catholic and earlier than Catholic. Okay. But I thought you were Catholic.
I grew up Catholic, when I was a kid in the Bronx.
Yeah,
but
you got that Catholic twang to your accent. And I did the Assemblies of God charismatic part of my spiritual journey too. I've done all that. Okay. The Eastern Orthodox would certainly be a different strain from my upbringing, but there's a lot to say there, Ed. But one comment I'll make about this is becoming Orthodox was very helpful for me in the sense that I still believe in the institutional church. I believe it's worldwide. I believe it's mostly in nations that are kind of heavily persecuted. It's not health and wealth and prosperity. It's multicolored of all sorts of different races and ethnicities. And I believe that's a worldwide institution that I can believe in. I do believe in it. And being a part of that helped me in my process of kind of giving up on exceptional America, Christian America, good America. America is an empire, and it's really become an evil empire, and that's a very hard thing for any American to come to grips with. And it's easier to do when you have another ship to jump onto.
And that might be a good time to say our goodbyes, because then I can do a little spiel about Adventures in Life Ministry. My friends who's down in Mexico down there trying to get mortar filters. Okay, I can do a
great. Well, listen, I enjoyed it very much. I'll let you know when I have my next expose on something, and we'll do it again.
Dean, thank you so much. I really did enjoy it too. Thank you very much.
See you.
Good night. Okay, there we had Dean Arnold, the author of where are we here? Okay, Dean Arnold, the author of Hillary, Vince, Hillary and Vince, A Story of Love, Death, and Cover-Up. Now, you can find that at bluebridge.com, which is BLOObridge.com. Also, the link will be in the Opperman Report.com website and on the blog, too. I promise you guys from now on I'm going to start updating the blog more than I have been, especially that week when I was out of town. And I know a lot of people went and visited the blog looking for updates, what happened to the show, where's Ed, all that kind of stuff. And I haven't been updating the blog as much as I would like to. So I just want to give a little shout-out, though, to my friend Dave Walters from Grace Church over here in Las Vegas. Since we were just talking about our friend there, Dean Arnold's new view on Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Dave goes down to, he has a ministry called Adventures in Life Ministry, and it's ailministry.org. And one of the things that Dave does is he goes down to this little town, Oaxaca, in Mexico. And this is one of those towns, too, where they're having that big revolt there with the teachers' union are fighting against the police and the army. You have these women out there actually standing there with rifles and shotguns, standing up for their rights there in Mexico. But Dave's not running guns down there to the women of the Oaxaca school teachers union down there. What he is doing, though, is supplying water filters. And just one of these water filters, and he demonstrated it for us there in a video at church on Sunday, is you can take one of these water filters, it's about $100, and it lasts like a lifetime for a family down there. And they could take the water from the river, and it will filter out all the water from the river, and it makes potable water. So these, you can go to the Facebook page, Adventures in Life Ministry, and you can find him there. Or you can go to their website, ailministry.org. They're just about to take a trip down there if you want to help support them and send a little donation their way and maybe chip in and buy one of these filters. Phone number for them is 626-975-5433. And it's Dave Miller. Dave Miller. I gotta call him Walter. Dave Miller's the guy that hooked us up with the family up there, the Hammond family that got mixed up in that whole Bundy Ranch situation, that standoff. The family was just a bunch of ranchers and did a backburn because the fire was coming. And next thing you know, I got all hell broke loose. And then those nutty Bundys came up there and just hijacked the whole situation. So the Hammonds were working on a deal to get out of there. Now that they're still in there. But anyway, back to Dave Miller. You can go to the Dave Miller Facebook page, or you can get a hold of Dave Miller at ailministry.org or Adventures in Life Ministry on Facebook. And like I said, what they're doing is that they're bringing water filters down there to Oaxaca, Mexico. And one of these water filters can supply a family with water for the rest of their lives, guys. So this is something really important that you could do for the people out there in Mexico. Okay, got about 3 minutes left. Let's see, coming up tomorrow, it may not be tomorrow for you, but on Saturday, 7/2/2016, I'm going to be interviewing, doing a show about the Kurt Cobain murder. I have that show coming up with Gary Byrne. I'm going to be interviewing him. It's going to be a pre-recorded interview. That's going to be on 7/7/2016, July 7th. Gary Byrne was a Secret Service agent who was assigned to the White House during the Clintons. Has a lot of information that's coming out in his book that has not been reported yet. So that'll be good to have him. We'll ask him about this Vince Forces stuff, see what he knows about that. Tonight, I'm going to be doing, what is that tonight? Well, anyway, no one's going to hear it tonight, so it'll be past already. So there's no point in telling you about tonight, but it's going to be a great show. I can tell you that. It's going to be a great show. Oh, boy. And I'll tell you, I'm going to be telling a story, too, about how we went up to Mount Charleston. We got stuck in these floods this week. It took us about 4 hours to get home. Car blew up on us. It was low on oil. And I had to stalled out. We had to walk down to the fire station. The volunteer fireman gave us some oil. And then we went down and went on this hike, and then got stuck in the rain. It was hail, it was floods. Driving home, we had to go through flood channels and water up to our waist. So, quite an adventure yesterday. But anyway, today was Dean Arnold, Hillary and Vince, A Story of Love, Death, and Cover-Up. And that's bluebridge.com. Dean Arnold, very interesting stuff. And we'll be probably having him back in the future and start more investigative work there. Thank you, Dean Arnold.
Having a life scholarship and being able to afford to go to college made me feel inspired to go.
When I got a life scholarship, it was such a relief.
I knew that I wanted to have an impact. Having a life scholarship through the SC Education Lottery was huge. It gave me the opportunity to make that impact right here at home.
The South Carolina Education Lottery. A better you, a better us, a better South Carolina. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.